Welcome to Mean Age Daydream with me, Brian McWilliams, where we're going to be making some jokes, laughing out at broken world, but also laying out some philosophy for the future, how we can fix this mess we're in and have a great time doing it all with a Mean Age Daydream. Hey, you chunky monkeys. Welcome to Mean Age Daydream with me, your host, the beautiful bald Brian McWilliams, and I am joined today with a very special guest, a man I've grown very fond of over the years, and the only man who can give Matt Kibbe a run for his money when it comes to mustache style, which is Logan Albright. Logan, what's up, man?
Hey, Brian. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, my friend, of course. Well, I completely boned you the last time you had a book out, and I had to make up for that this time around with some good attention to a book, which I'm excited to talk about, which is Freedom Over Fear. That's the new book that you published with the assistants. There's the beautiful cover. Yep, I like the cover, by the way. It's solid art. I like that it's simple and effective. It looks very nice.
Well, it was done by Matt Battaglia, who does all the Free the People art. And he's very good.
There you go. I'm not surprised to hear that. Another talented author who I've had on the show when he released his graphic novel, by the way. So this is another author from Free the People. And Free the People also helped with the publishing of the book, correct?
Yeah, we decided to publish internally this time because it just takes too long to go through a traditional publisher. They spend like a year, doing distribution and copy editing and stuff, and then they take a huge chunk of the profits. So just put it out ourselves, and we can get it out within a month or so,
Yeah, exactly. Well, also, I was just reading an article about how straight white male writers have also had an unbelievably difficult time getting published by any major foundations or major publishers. So maybe that's not the same thing in the academic environment or our type of message here, but it just was an interesting read. So
I think there's something to it. I've heard that as well. I mean, I've gotten a few nonfiction books published, which hasn't been too hard, but getting fiction published is a real beast. It's very difficult to do.
Yeah, exactly right. That was basically the crux of the article I was reading. I think even Joyce Carol Oates, a famous author, had come out and said that, yeah, there's a dearth of especially young males writing fiction. Like the novelist, the young white male novelist is now a creature of the past. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about fear to bring us into this holiday season. So let's jump into it, because as we said before the call, you're at Free the People Studio for a holiday party and business meeting, which is hilarious. So I know you've got to run to that. And of course, do make sure that Matt throws up somewhere on the floor and not in the toilet, and that Terry's not there to take care of him. That's all I ask.
That. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's get into it, man. I mean, tell me a little bit about the impetus for writing Freedom Over Fear. I mean, the title pretty much says it all, but what inspired this?
Right. So this book was born during the pandemic. And I came to Washington, D.C. about 12 years ago as an idealistic young man. And I thought, I'm going to fight for liberty. I'm going to show people that having a free world is better. Having a free country is better. And initially I thought, the way to do that is with logic and facts and data and things like that, because I have an unusual brain, it turns out, and those kind of things appeal to me. They don't appeal to everybody. So after a few years banging my head against the wall trying to do that, we switched over to the Free the People model, which is more kind of cultural storytelling, that type of thing, to try to appeal more emotionally to people. And then the pandemic hit, and I noticed that a lot of people I knew who called themselves libertarians just suddenly went crazy and threw away all the principles that they professed to have and said, please protect me. I'll do anything. Just keep me safe. And I really went through kind of this dark night of the soul where I was like, I'm not sure what to do about this, because even if people who intellectually agree with me are willing to sell out so quickly, but when they get afraid, I'm not sure what to do about that. And the Washington Post ran an article where they claimed there's no libertarians in foxholes, which there's a certain amount of truth to, because people just, give up. And I spent a long time being depressed and thinking about it and trying to figure out what to do. And I realized that the problem of creating a freer country or a freer world is far more difficult than I initially thought. And the reason for that is that fear is such a primal emotion. And when you feel it, you're not capable of being rational. You're not capable of thinking clearly and critically and considering trade-offs, doing cost-benefit analysis. All that goes out the window. So in order to convince people that freedom is worth sticking up for, you have to conquer fear itself. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so my colleague, Sam Martin, who's the creative director here at Free the People, had an idea to do a series of videos called Freedom Over Fear, where we kind of highlight past instances of the government using fear tactics and appealing to fear in order to try to take people's rights away, in order to try to expand their own power. And we did, I don't know, maybe a dozen of those. And they were great. And I thought this would be a good book. I can kind of collect these stories and expand on them and write some different things and end up making a book about it. So I spent about a year writing it and finally got it out. And that's the basic idea of the book, is to give people some perspective, because I do believe that perspective is like the enemy of fear. To show them that this has happened before, it will happen again. The government will always try to scare you in order to push their agenda and take your rights away. And my hope is that if people realize that and they see the playbook being run over and over again, they'll be less likely to fall for it in the future. So that's the basic behind the book.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing, it's when you do think about it, the difficulty in overcoming fear is so much more pronounced because you've got a constant enemy banging on the gates and making sure that there's always a demon under the bed, that there's always going to be something lurking in the shadows to scare you. And as you said, that's more often than not government, but also to a larger degree, well, not a large degree, but in a, I guess, crony capitalist tied in degree. So many of the corporations that are in bed with government are also complicit in that. I mean, you look to big pharma, you look to even, our construction companies, I'm sure, who will build the roads? The old question.
No, that's absolutely right. And the media in particular is very bad about this.
Oh, terrible. I mean, absolutely. Well, as we all know, the media is more than a partner in the government for everything they're doing. But tell me a little bit more about, so this is broke down into 10 different chapters and then an afterward. Are there any chapters you particularly want to talk about? And I'll throw out the ones that I want to talk about a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Because we're just coming out of COVID, obviously fear of sickness, that is, like you were talking about earlier, one of the most overstated examples of even people you think that would have an understanding, be able to logically use their brains to process the risk and reward, completely capitulated. And, I don't want to throw certain people under the bus, but I will say Jacob Hornberger is one example that stands out in my mind as somebody that's a libertarian that completely capitulated. But I definitely want to start talking with that. And then, I loved the fear of poverty. I love it because it's a fantastic example of an absolutely failed. And again, these are a lot of your example of failed ideologies.
Yeah.
The war on poverty. I really want to talk about the fear of failure and the fear of the unknown, because that, to me, those are two unbelievably powerful topics, and ones which I think that when you're talking about changing the culture, they have to be central to us winning the war. So let's start with the fear of sickness, though, and then we'll move through them and throw in whatever else you want to add in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, as you say, is broken into 10 chapters that are basically different types of primal fears that people experience, and examples from about the last 100 years of American history of how that's happened. The first chapter is fear of sickness, which deals with COVID, and COVID's been kind of talked to death. So I don't know that I have too much new to say about it, but one of the things I really focused on in the book is rhetoric. And I wanted to quote as much as I could from speeches that people actually gave to show the kind of words that they use to gin up this fear. And the one that I really like is Joe Biden talking about the winter of sickness and death, the dark winter coming towards us if you don't get vaccinated. And that's like such Game of Thrones language, it's like it's terrifying. And I found that really, really telling, that people just immediately jump to that kind of apocalyptic language. But COVID was a great example because, they were constantly on television telling you, if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to die. If you don't, wear a mask, if you don't refrain from seeing your family at holidays, if you don't do all these things we're telling you to do, don't question it, just do it. Because if you don't, not only are you going to die, but you're going to spread the illness to everyone else. And this whole, like, you can spread it even if you don't know you have it, these asymptomatic spread. So it was a really very clear and present example of this sort of thing going on. And yeah, I was so angry for the entire lockdown period, because I couldn't believe not only that they were getting away with it, but that people would just seem to not even just embrace it, but demand it. There were so many people who were eager for more lockdowns. They're like, please protect me at any cost. And one of the points that I think is important to make, and that I try to make clear in the book, is that I'm not saying that these fears are unwarranted. I'm not saying that all these things are hoaxes. I'm not saying that they're like COVID killed a lot of people. I'm not saying COVID's a hoax or COVID wasn't serious or anything like that. But the point I'm trying to make is not don't be afraid of these things. My point I'm trying to make is be rationally afraid of these things. Like think about it and weigh trade-offs and do other things instead of just throwing everything out the window and having this like fixation, this monomania on this one thing. And that was like the lack of trade-offs is something we really saw during COVID. It's like, well, we don't care about cancer patients anymore. Let's just not have them get mammograms or checkups or anything. That's not important anymore. It doesn't matter. Just COVID. That's the only thing we care about. We don't care if people can't feed their families because they can't go to work. That doesn't matter. Just COVID deaths is the only thing that matters. And like, there's clearly other things that matter, but when you're afraid, you stop considering those other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another perfect example of our government utilizing fear and also just patently lying to us. I mean, we're not discounting the impact that COVID did have on people that died, as you mentioned, but let's not forget the amount of time that government tripled, quadrupled down, misled us on the facts and the factoids to play more into the fear. We can open up because this X, Y, and Z. We can't open up because a new round of COVID is coming. How many times are we told a new COVID variant was coming until we had to justify lockdowns and further masking and further erosion and business closures? I mean, it's a perfect example of it, amplified by the media. So, to your point, the interest of the evil actors out there really made COVID an absolutely perfect example of everything that we are worried about. Okay, so let's move on then. Well, I mean, we could talk about fear of violence just because it's interesting that, what's his name? Daniel Perry? Penny just got let off. I would say rightly so, but maybe that's a good time just to touch on the fear of violence chapter, since that is on everybody's mind. Rampant subway violence. What do you do to stop it? And then one guy actually steps up to stop it, and the state tries to go after him.
Yeah, well, the fear of violence chapter is focused on the Patriot Act and the war on terror, because I was 18 years old in my first semester of college when 9/11 happened, and I remember being terrified, and everyone I knew was terrified. And again, there was good reason to be afraid. I'm not saying that it wasn't anything, but people just surrendered their reasoning, and they passed the Patriot Act overnight with only one senator voting against it. Nobody bothered to read it or see what was in it. It's just, we got to do something. We got to do something now to protect ourselves. And it ushered in this like complete change of the American lifestyle. We got the TSA out of it. We got the Department of Homeland Security out of it. We got all this kind of warrantless surveillance out of it. And nobody questioned it because we just had to be protected. We were just afraid. And so that's what the focus of that chapter is on. It's on the rhetoric of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and all the people in that administration who say, listen, if you don't just give us all the power to do whatever we want to do without any kind of checks and balances, then there's going to be more terrorist attacks. So just trust us to take care of it. We're going to solve it. And of course, that ultimately led to the war in Iraq, which is one of the worst foreign policy disasters in American history.
Yeah. And let's not forget, by extension, we're looking at the fall of Syria right now, wherein a rebel group, which we have armed, I believe, I can't remember if it was the CIA or the Pentagon armed this one, but led by a former member of Al-Qaeda, which of course we had propped up, ISIS, which we had armed and propped up, now is in control of Syria. And of course, the United States is interested in going in, taking part, taking an active role, this new regime, which I'm sure will end up fighting. But to your point, this fear of violence led to all of this funding of these rebel groups, all of these activities overseas, all the NDAA. It is insane. And people are going along with it because they're misled in that we have to be so active in countries across the world from us for fear that there's going to be some sort of new attack, when obviously the blowback and the reprisals are really the thing that should be most feared.
Yeah, and I hear crazy things like, well, we have to have, troops stationed in Germany still, or all these kind of Western European countries where America still has troops stationed. That's important that we have that to protect American interest abroad. And it's like, we're not in any danger from those countries. We don't need to have troops there. It's ridiculous. But, people just don't question it because they think, well, they're the military. They must know best. And I'm trying to get people to think a little more critically about these things.
Yep. Well, let's talk about something that people do not think critically about whatsoever, despite demonstrable failure across the board, and that is the war on poverty. And you get into the chapter talking about, of course, the New Deal, FDR. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's kind of two chapters dealing with this. The fear of poverty chapter deals with the New Deal, which was FDR's kind of failed attempt to get us out of the Great Depression. Everyone was in a horrible financial collapse and trying to deal with that. And FDR said, I will save you. Just trust me. It'll give me unlimited power. His orders, one after the other, got struck down as unconstitutional. He got elected to 4 terms in office, which I think that's really interesting, because if you read his inauguration speech, or his nomination speeches rather, at the convention, he always says, well, I don't want to do it. I want to step down and have a private life. I don't care. I don't want power. I don't want to be a president, but you can't change horses in midstream. And I'm the only one who can solve this problem. And first it was, the Great Depression, and then it was the war. It's like, I'm the only one who can do this. I have to stay in and do it. Not because I want to, but because I love my country so much. And that's such a transparent tactic that you see people use to try to stay in power, is saying, it's not that I want power, it's that I'm the only one who can solve this problem, and it's my duty to do it. So that's really interesting. And then the other chapter that deals with this is called The Fear of Failure, which is a little bit unique in the book because it's dealing with more of an internal psychological state rather than a fear of an external harm. And that kind of deals with the Great Society program under Johnson, which is it's anti-meritocratic policies. Essentially, it's this idea that, well, I might not be good enough. I might not be able to compete on my own terms. I might not be able to succeed. So I need the government to come in and protect me from my own inadequacy through things like affirmative action and things like, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that, to just insure against my own inadequacy. And I think that's sort of an interesting chapter in the book, just because it takes a slightly different psychological lens than the other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the fear of failure thing really stands out. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it is something that is so hard to combat because we've been taught through, our education systems, through our political systems, that, and emphasized again by the media, we always have to think about those less fortunate and what would happen to them if not for big daddy government, right? I mean, it is really driven into our skulls. I worked with my public relations career with multiple nonprofits, and even through those, I drive into the media, what's going to happen? Like a foster organization, like, what's going to happen to these kids? Never mind, these kids are on foster care in LA and have a terrible outcomes from the state-run. What will happen to these kids? Will they turn out homeless and criminals? Thank you, government. But we constantly harp on that. Who is going to help these people? What's going to be done for them? Well, somebody's got, won't somebody think of the children? Won't somebody do something for the poor? And nobody seems to want to, number one, acknowledge that just like with the war on poverty, the outcomes have been abysmal, trusting the government. And number two, nobody seems that interested, and I'll tell you a little side story about this, in actually solving the problem in unique ways. And I don't know if that's, the fear of failure there, I guess, is there's always going to be a risk in trying something new. And this is also tying to like the risk of the unknown. But my wife's family out here in Los Angeles created a novel type of homeless housing structure. It was a private club. They take people that were homeless in, allow them to stay there at a very discounted rate. They got some funding from the government, but it was designed to be a for-profit. Now, they didn't make a lot of money, but for-profit. And if they violated rules like drug abuse or violence, they could kick them out, which is something you can't do in any of these other places. The government, of course, stopped funding them, started attacking them, and they were forced to shut down and sell all of these profitable solutions to homelessness. So, talking about failure, not only do you have the public, which is afraid of trying something new, but you also have government actors incentivized to stop people from doing anything new.
This is the example of like government protecting their own monopoly on this. Basically, there was a story that someone told recently. I remember we were interviewing who talked about there was people feeding the poor, and the FDA came along and destroyed all the food that they were giving out because it hadn't been sufficiently approved by FDA inspectors. And so they poured ammonia over it and destroyed it. Like, only we can help the poor. You're not allowed to help the poor. Only the government can do it. And they're kind of playing into that narrative that it has to be done this certain way. And there's so many like people doing like what your wife, you said.
It's my wife's stepmother and
your wife's stepmother. So many like entrepreneurial solutions to these problems people are coming up with. And it's so inspiring to see ways that they're helping each other. And then it's just depressing that the government comes in and shuts it down because they want to be the only game in town.
Yeah. So what do you think then? And again, I want to talk a little about like the fear of the unknown chapter as well. But what do you think, and per the book, what do you think is the best way to overcome that, especially the fear of failure narrative and the fear of the unknown? I mean, what do you think from a cultural perspective, from, how do we fight this war effectively?
It's difficult. The afterword in the book kind of deals with my recommendations on what people can do. I kind of think the best thing you can do is read a lot of history and see and have a lot of experiences in your own life. Those are kind of the two things I think you can do, because the more perspective you have and the more broader knowledge of the world you have, the less terrifying things are, I think. Like the example I like to give is, why do babies cry all the time? Babies cry all the time because they're hungry. It's the worst hunger they've ever felt. or it's the worst pain they've ever felt, or it's the worst fear they've ever felt. Everything is new and like unknown to them. And they're like, I don't know if the pain's going to get worse. I don't know if it's going to last forever. I don't know if it's ever going to go away. I get hungry about twice a day. But I've been hungry before, and I know that it's not the end of the world, and I know it's going to go away if I eat. And so it doesn't stress me out. And it's the same kind of thing with like reading history. You read about, well, we've been through these difficult time periods before, we've gotten through it. And then on a personal level, if you've overcome hardship yourself, you can say, things have been worse before. I got through it. I'll get through this too. And it doesn't scare you as much. I think that's kind of the most important thing you can do. And like so many people now, young people, just seem to have this attitude that like nothing happened before I was born. Everything is now has always been the way it's been. And they don't have any interest in looking back and seeing the way things used to be. And there's this romanticization of the past of like, oh, everything used to be great and now it's terrible, which is insane. I really hate that kind of nostalgia thing because it's just so inaccurate. And so like the more you read about the way things used to be and the way people used to live and the more experiences you have in your own life, the more immune you're going to be to this kind of stuff, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. Even the current generation seems to be ignorant of the way in which other people live in the current world, let alone the historical world, where they're out there protesting and saying how bad things are here in the United States and how miserable they are. And granted, there are some valid criticisms of that. I mean, our inflationary state is definitely a problem. The affordability problem is out there, and let's not make light of people's difficulties there, but you're still living in a very first world country that's benefited from capitalism. You can still look across the world and see like how miserable, how screwed up, how freedom less so many other places are, and appreciate maybe things are okay.
One of the benefits of travel is seeing how other people live and being like, actually, maybe things aren't so bad where I live after all. Yeah.
It's pretty shocking at times. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about I want to go a little deeper into the chapter about fear of the unknown. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's sort of my concluding chapter. And I largely focused in that on, because I wrote this right, as we were running up to the 2024 election, I kind of focused on this whole idea of like people using fear to scare you into voting the way they want you to vote and saying, well, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And if you don't vote for my guy or my girl, it's going to be the end of democracy. It's going to be the last election of our lifetimes. It's going to be, complete collapse, societal collapse. And, that rhetoric has happened every election that I've been alive for. They've said the same thing, and it's never been true. And I think that, fear of the unknown is the most primal fear that we have. It's like, we don't know what's going to happen. It might be bad. So we're afraid of it, but again, like, just look at the history of the United States, and it's such a resilient country. It's such an amazing country. We've had lots of bad presidents in the past. We've had lots of terrible presidents in the past. People keep saying that Biden's like the worst president ever. And I'm like, have you heard of Woodrow Wilson? Come on. It's insane. But we got through it, and we got through a civil war, and we got through 2 world wars, and we got through a Great Depression. And it's like, things seem pretty good to me overall. And using that rhetoric to say you have to vote the way I want you to vote because otherwise it's going to be the collapse of society. And I've fallen for it. My first couple election cycles as an adult where I was able to vote, I was being scared into voting for one of the 2 major parties instead of voting third party or abstaining or writing in someone. And because I fell for the lie. And I don't anymore. And I think it's important that people kind of see that this pattern is repeated over and over again so that they don't fall for it in the future. That's basically what I was getting at the chapter. And then the second half of the chapter is a little bit more of a meditation on just the consequences of this whole zeitgeist we're in, I guess. And I noticed that like people are so pessimistic and so depressed right now. And I don't really understand why, but I think it's the worst thing. Like, people ask me, like, what do you think is the greatest threat to liberty? Is it nuclear weapons? Is it war? Is it, global warming? What is it? And I think it's pessimism, because if you believe, like a lot of Gen Zers believe, that things are the worst they've ever been and they're only getting worse, it's impossible, I'll never be able to afford a house, systemic racism is preventing me from ever achieving anything, all these things that people are told, where it's basically hopeless and it's never going to get any better. If that's what you believe, there's no reason to try to make things better. There's no reason to try to do anything. There's no reason to reproduce and have kids. People are abstaining from having kids for all kinds of stupid reasons because they're afraid of how bad the future is going to be. There's no reason to try to work hard and build something great. And I think that just destroys your society. It leads to complete collapse because, there's just no motivation for anyone to do anything good. And so that's kind of what I really want to push back on and say, like, guys, like, things aren't that bad. Like, take a step back, look at the broader context, and realize that like we can do great things, even if things are tough right now and inflation is bad and there's too many wars and there's all these things we don't like going on. We've gotten through worse before. We can get through this too. We just have to like work together and actually try to solve these problems instead of giving up. And that's what I really worry about, is people giving up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I really loved, that you finished the book kind of on that note of, with that fear of the unknown. And I completely agree. I mean, I always harken back to Annie. The sun will come out tomorrow, Annie.
Yeah.
It's going to be a brand new day. And to your point about pessimism, yeah, man, I'm blown away by these people that, yeah, like you said, don't want to have children because of climate change, or live in a constant state of fear and terror, when I want enthusiasm for the future. And you look at the advances in technology and medical science. You look at what's going on with Elon Musk and rocket ships, and even AI. As scared as you might be of the robots rising up against us, the advancements that AI can lead to, and insofar as allowing humanity to travel into space, to solving problems, to making breakthroughs, it's so unbelievable, and the potential is so unbelievable that I have such a hard time seeing people that don't seem to have any enthusiasm, or any optimism. And it just is. I mean, I think of that I've got two little girls. That's something I'm going to drive into their skulls, is you always have a chance to make, the next day great, and to add on to that. And there's always opportunity there. And I mean, it's depressing to see people that just can't seem to shake that.
Yes, it's very depressing. And, I don't know what you do about it really, but I think being a good parent and teaching them the right thing is a good start. Yeah, it's just really, really depressing to see that people have that attitude. And I try to, whenever I talk to young people, I try to put it in perspective for them and let them see that things aren't as bad as they think they are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's key to it, is that, like we're talking about, historical perspective, current events perspective, anything in perspective. And I say it to my daughter all the time. I said, is this a big deal? No, the things you've said, they're not a big deal. And you can do this tomorrow and you can make a better day. But I think also, it's something where talking to people about just the perspective of what can you do to make your life better, and what can you do to make other people's lives better. And I almost wonder if it comes back around to a neuroticism and some sort of taught, honestly, mental issue when it comes to optimism, because of social media, which obviously is a big component of it.
Yeah.
And that people are always dwelling on what they don't have, and how the issues of, they don't have everything else that they see online, and they see other people flaunting and taunting them with. And so don't identify how well off they may have it. I mean, do you think that that's a good
No,
point?
that's
Especially when we're talking
absolutely
the younger
right.
generation. I mean, that to me seems to be
social media presents such a skewed worldview of the way other people live, because people only put the best stuff that makes them look good on social media. You don't put how much debt you're in on social media. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend who had a swimming pool and a big house, and I was like, Mom, why is that kid so rich? How do they have so much money? They have a swimming pool. We don't have a swimming pool. And she was like, well, they have like $100,000 in debt and we don't. That's why. Like, people don't see the bad thing, they only see the good thing. And so you get a very skewed outlook of how other people live and how well other people are doing. And, there's the expression, comparison is the thief of joy, which I think is really true.
Yes.
So spending all your time looking at how other people are instead of focusing on yourself can be really harmful to your mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us more about where people can find your books, because again, this one's through Free the People. However, you are a author of, I believe, 3 books that I know of. So where else can people follow you? Where can they find your writings? I'm presuming this book is available at freethepeople.org.
Yeah. So this is my fourth book, fourth nonfiction book. It is all my writing, well, not all my writing, but most of my writing and a lot of the video work that I do and sound and music and all the crazy things I do are available at freethepeople.org. Please check out our organization. We do some really interesting kind of documentary films, if you don't know, about kind of spreading the message of liberty through culture. That's great. If you want to see other stuff I'm up to, I have my own personal website, loganalbright.com. And that's got my books on it. It's got my music on it. It's got some other writing that I do. It's got my YouTube channel. It's got all my social media. It's all on there. So those are the 2 best places to find out what I'm up to. And also, this is available on Amazon. So if you just type my name into Amazon, all my books will come up there too.
Perfect. And I know I said we're gonna keep this a little shorter since you do have a party and meeting to go to. But there's one thing I forgot to mention at the top of the show that is topical and ties into the COVID chapter, and that is, can you believe that Joe Biden is talking about a preemptive pardon for Anthony Fauci after all we've been through and learned?
as my optimistic temperament is, I am a libertarian anarchist. So I feel like anything that undermines the public's faith in the institution of government is sort of a positive. And
Yeah.
that's just so obviously corrupt and like abusive of the spirit of like the presidential powers that
Yeah.
maybe like, I mean, I don't think Anthony Fauci is going to get brought to justice either way. I really hope he does. I hope I'm wrong about it, but it doesn't look good so far. If Biden goes ahead and does that, it's awful and I hate it. But maybe it'll make some people wake up and realize actually this whole institution is just completely corrupt and has no interest in justice and has no interest in helping people. It's all just like cronyism. And to me, that would be sort of a win for liberty in the long run. So I try to look on the bright side.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there. I think I may even voice that. I did a little rant on it for our Patreon crowd. And I think I said the same thing. I'm like, please, I love it when they're this obvious about it. It
Right.
makes me happy.
They're not even hiding it anymore. It's
No.
crazy.
Patent corruption. All right. Well, that was great. Again, guys, you could go to freethepeople.org to get Freedom Over Fear. Hold up that book again, Riff Horace. Beautiful.
Right
I'll also
there.
put it in our graphic for the show. But yeah, Freedom Over Fear, guys. Logan Albright. Check him out, freethepeople.org. And of course, loganalbright.com. Enjoy the party, man. Enjoy the meeting. Please tell everybody at Free the People that I love them and keep up the great work. And of course, beat the crap out of your livers.
I will do so. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember, you can follow us, support us, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, lionsofliberty.locals.com. And if you get an annual subscription or upgrade to an annual subscription, you get a beautiful Lions of Liberty Christmas mug from the good people. A lot of strong people involved in the movement here, and we want to make sure that we give them Christmas bonuses. So, all right, that's it from me, from Logan, from the Lions Liberty Network, and from the Mean Age Daydream. Keep those electric eyes on me, babe, and keep that ray gun to my head. All right, bye. Kisses and hugs.